Thank you all for joining us this evening on Facebook. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book here in Houston, and I could not be happier to be joined by several authors that I'm a big fan of. So we are here to celebrate the release of Blacktop Wasteland by Sean Cosby. We're also joined by Walter Mosley, whose latest book is Trouble Is What I Do. And Rachel Howzell Hall has generously agreed to moderate her paperback of They All Fall Down. Will be out in 2 weeks, and she has another awesome thriller coming out this September, and we're hoping to have her on here for her own event at that point. I'll go ahead and get everyone introduced and then turn it over to Rachel. So Rachel Howzell Hall is the author of the bestseller and Anthony and ITW and Lefty Award nominated They All Fall Down, and writes the acclaimed Lou Norton series. She's also the co-author of The Good Sister with James Patterson, which was included in the New York Times bestseller The Family Lawyer. She is currently on the board of directors for the Southern California chapter of Mystery Writers of America and lives in Los Angeles. Her next novel, And Now She's Gone, will be published in September 2020. And again, They All Fall Down is highly recommended by us. I suggest you check it out. So next up, Walter Mosley is the author of more than 43 critically acclaimed books, including the major best-selling mystery series featuring Easy Rawlins. His work has been translated into 23 languages and includes literary fiction, science fiction, political monographs, and a young adult novel. His short fiction has been widely published, and his nonfiction has appeared in the New York Times Magazine and The Nation, among other publications. He's the winner of numerous awards, including an O. Henry Award, a Grammy, and PEN America's Lifetime Achievement Award. He lives in New York City, and as I said, Trouble Is What I Do is his latest book featuring Leonid McGill. He's also been gracious enough to sign book plates for us, which we're expecting any day. So if you want to order a copy of that book, we'll make sure to get one of the signed book plates in there for you. And last but not least, S.A. Cosby, who we'll call Sean this evening, is an Anthony Award-winning writer from Southeastern Virginia. His short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies and magazines. His story, Slant 6, was selected as a distinguished story in Best American Mystery Stories for 2016, and his short story, The Grass Beneath My Feet, won the Anthony Award for Best Short Story in 2019. He's here to discuss his third novel, a brand new release that has everyone talking, Blacktop Wasteland. We also have signed book plates for that too, so if you'd like to place an order, we'll get that stuck in there. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. We will get to them later on, but for now, I'm going to mute myself and my video and turn it over to Rachel. Thank you guys and have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you again for allowing us to talk books and crime and heists and relationships and all the rest of it. And I read both of these. I poked my head out. I'm working on edits for my next book, right? And I usually don't read great novels when I'm actively editing because that's when I feel the most like a hack. But when I was asked to host, you both, I couldn't say no because I adore both of you, and both of you are incredible technicians. And so I read it, and yes, I felt like a hack, but it was worth it. It was worth it, and I flew through this. And so when I first started, I'm like, how are they both going to connect these two works? Because one, the age differences between the characters and the place and all the rest of it, they're different, but then they're not. And so I'm just gonna throw out things, and I would like this just to be kind of a conversation. So my first thing that I noticed was making something out of nothing, which is, an African-American tradition, and that's all we have, chitlins and greens and potato pie. We made something out of nothing. And for both books, there were old cars, relationships, family, poverty, Blackness. When you came to write these ideas, was that on top of your mind, like the tradition of taking something that's broken, if that's a parental relationship, if that's an old car, if that's, the streets of New York and using the taxi system, which no one uses anymore. Did you think about that kind of tradition of what we do and make something beautiful that originally, is trash.
I'm gonna defer to Walter on for.
Really? Oh, okay. I mean, it's an interesting notion. I wrote a book about writing not that long ago, Elements of Fiction, and one of the concepts inside of that is that writing itself is making something out of nothing, right? There's, there you are, and nothing is, no cars are exploding, nobody's getting shot, all these things are, but that's all that stuff is potentially going on inside of you, and then you start to write or to talk or to tell the story, and you're coming up with something out of nothing, but nothing being the kind of whole history that you embody. Mm-hmm. And one of the things when I started writing, which listen, I never think of myself as being very old, but that's not true. I am, and so a long time ago, it's 30 years ago that I published my first novel.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's like when I started writing, there weren't a lot of Black men who came to my readings. Black women did, and they were reading books, but Black men had been so traumatized for centuries by their public portrayals, mm-hmm. that they didn't want to have anything to do with it. Yeah, I'm in a book. Am I shining somebody's shoes? Am I after his woman? What? And it took a long time to, convince people that they should be, reading those books. And that's like, I guess that would be creating something out of nowhere, right?
Right.
And that's how it ends. I mean, it's not about my book, but that's okay.
For me, writing, the act of writing was the only thing I had. I've talked about this a lot. I grew up very, very poor in the hills of Virginia. I didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 16. I'm 46, so do the math on that. And writing and books were the only things that sometimes kept me afloat, that you have this unrelenting, unmitigating poverty and pain, and my life, my first 5 years of my life are like a bad country song. Our house, my mom and dad split up. We had to move in with my grandparents, and so the only thing is my dog didn't die. And so, so writing was the act of me escaping, the misery to some extent of where I was at. And so when I created Bug and Blacktop Wasteland, it was a lot of catharsis for me, because the things that Bug is going through are the things he is going through are things that I had lived through. And so every time I sat down to write or further the story, it was like taking another brick off my back and through creating this fictional story, I gained a modicum of freedom. And by the end of it, I felt like a millstone had been taken from around my neck. I have to say something real quick. Mm-hmm. And I know Walter doesn't remember this, but about 6 or 7 years ago, you came to Virginia. You did a lecture at William and Mary College. It was called Write a Novel in a Year. Mm-hmm. And it was a free lecture, and you could just go. And I went to that lecture, and I was in the audience, and I got to ask a question. And so it is just remarkable to me that 6 or 7 years later, after that incredible lecture, which was an incredible education in how to write, that I'm able to speak with you now. So that to me was creating something out of nothing as well. So.
Well, on that same theme, I want to turn to relationships, in particular, fathers. Now, there's this myth that there's no such thing as a Black father, right? They're basically like, unicorn's teeth, Black fathers. But in both of your novels, you have Leonard and Twill, Catfish and Charles, Bug and Anthony, Bug and Javon, and Danny, his younger son. And so there's this thing called Black dads and Black sons together in a book. Was that intentional? Was there something you wanted to say about Black fatherhood and relationships like that?
For me, yeah, you don't get to see that reflected in fiction a lot. You know, if the Black characters aren't magical Negroes, then they're broad stereotypes and caricatures. And I always tell people, you know, you can write from your point of view, but make sure your characters aren't caricatures. And so for me, it was important to establish that familial fatherly relationship. Even though Bug and his father don't have a good relationship, he's incredibly determined to be a good father for his sons and for his daughter. And so for me, it definitely was an intentional desire to show strong Black fatherhood, even with, you know, the warts and the bumps and the scars and the bumps and bruises. I wanted to show that idea that idea that there's no Black father is a fallacy, is a myth that people have bought into. So for me, yeah, it was definitely a part of the infrastructure.
Yeah, I had a wonderful and slightly crazy relationship with my own father, and you know, and we were very, very close. And you know, so a lot of, I think in the beginning when I was writing, there was me writing about not my father particularly, but the space my father took up in my imagination. And as time went on, you know, because a lot of times, you know, you find in families, especially families who, you know, come from, you know, kind of, you know, a poor upbringing and, you know, poor Black Southern upbringing, there's a lot of, well, you're going to do this kind of thinking. And, you know, it's something I never really enjoyed. And it's something my father never really believed in. I mean, he would have loved to tell me what to do, but he knew I wasn't going to do it. And so, you know, when I have now, like, you know, I just finished a new Easy Rawlins novel, and, you know, he's there, you know, with his daughter, adopted daughter, Feather. And, you know, she's, you know, he comes and talks and gets mad and everything. And she goes, "Dad, what's wrong?" You know, Twill in the first Leonid McGill book I wrote, you know, Leonid has a girlfriend. I mean, you know, Twill's not his real son, but nobody knows that. And he has this, you know, this girlfriend who's gotten killed, and he tells his son asks him, he tells him, and he says, so we're going to bury her, right? And like, this was like a new thing to Leonid. So there was, he's living, you know, with certainly taking care of his children, loving them very much. But at the same time, there's a space made for them to educate him, you know. Now, maybe 100 years ago and before, you know, when knowledge only doubled every century, that wasn't really the case, because, you know, the parent always knew more, no matter how old you got. But now that knowledge doubles every 10 months, you know, you actually need your children to tell you what's going on, because you say, well, how does this, the phone is a computer now?
I can't see that. What does that say?
Yeah. You know, that's the whole thing, you know, it's anyway, so yeah, I mean, that's not just about Black people there, you know, but of course, you know, I was raised, and, you know, most of us are raised in places where there are these extraordinary Black men who, one way or another, make things work for their kids. I mean, sometimes that doesn't happen, but that's all kinds of communities. You got fathers who come home every night who are not fathers to their children, you know.
That's so true. That's so true.
Well, seeing that, you know, going back to what Sean said and what you said about Black fathers being, you know, rarely reflected in literature like this. You know, you remember growing up, and if you got in trouble, and it was public, it was even worse, because you took the business out into the street, and you know, you cut up at home, your princes and princesses in the public. Both books are very personal and have like some private knowledge in there about what it is to be in a Black household. Did you feel any burden to, or did you want to keep any of our secret? Did you want to, was there a burden to not have this Black family, this Black male, to be so, well, not upright? You know what I mean? You're showing all the flaws and personal conversations and the struggles with even color, even, you know, was there any type of hesitation?
I think for me, you know, this is only my third book, so I felt a little bit of hesitation at first, but then, you know, anybody that's ever met me in person, I have a bit of stubbornness in me, a little bit. My mom would say a lot. And I felt it was important to the story, important to the character. And I wanted to present the character's flaws and all, you know, and, you know, I even have a situation in the book where, you know, Bug and Javon have to talk, you know, and people, you know, I have wonderful white friends that didn't know what the talk was. And so it was like, you have to have a talk about life and about being Black. And it kept ill. And so
and it's a multi-stage one because you tailor it to age.
As they get older, as I got older, my mom, and even though my mom and dad were separated, my dad, as I got older, had variations of the talk with me and expanded the outline. And so I didn't feel any hesitation about putting that in a book. If anything, I felt more people need to be aware of that. More new people need to see that and see those conversations and see them in real time, because there's a segment of society that doesn't want to believe those conversations happen, that don't want to believe that, you know, Black people actually sit down and have cognizant conversations about what's going on. That, you know, there's a segment of society that thinks that we just sit around and, you know, moan and groan about, oh, my poor lot in life. I'm like, no, we actually have serious conversations about how to get out from under where we're at. And even though Bug is an anti-hero, I would say, he still wants better for his children, and he wants better for all of his children, and he wants better for his wife. And so I think those conversations, even if they're raw, they create a certain camaraderie between the reader and the character.
Mm-hmm. Walter?
A lot of thoughts came up. I remember once talking to June Jordan about her son, and she said, well, you know, Walter, the minute my son was able to walk, I taught him not to run in public. Like he said, because if you're running, you did something wrong. And if you did something wrong and you're Black and you're running, you're going to get shot. Now, on the other hand, my father was talked to me, and he said, well, Walter, if you want to do as well as the white man, you got to come to work a half an hour early and leave a half an hour later. And if you want to do better, you got to come in at least an hour early and leave at least an hour later. I was like 14. I said, but Dad, that's not fair. And he goes, that's right. That was the end of our conversation. You know? Now you know where you are. And then two other things. You know, one is, you know, my idea of race. I've kind of adopted a kind of phraseology of Malcolm X, but instead of saying the so-called Negro, I say the so-called white person. You know, because there are no white people in America. There are no Black people in America. There's certainly no yellow people. You know, there are people who are kind of brown. There are versions of brown. But the idea of you know, like a totality, it's like somebody comes up to me and says, well, you know what Black people think? I'm saying, man, I don't know, neither do you, because Black people think different things. You know, that's, you know, one of the things, you know, our experience isn't monolithic. You know, my mother was Jewish, my father, you know, Black, or whatever they call it. We don't, African American's funny thing if you compare it to Italian American, but that's another subject. But I was thinking that, you know, I think that Sean is, you know, is really really strong about talking about, you find yourself in a place in life that you're the Black man, you find yourself in a place in life, and you're kind of stuck to it. You know, it's like you want to get away from it and maybe get the right hand away, but then you know, you push and then the left hand, you know, and it goes on and on like that. And I really like that. And of course, a lot of my characters are very, very heroic, even the most evil ones, like, you know, Mouse. I mean, they're really heroic characters. But I do have a book coming out in September that, you know, you know, maybe vying a little bit with Sean, and it's called The Awkward Black Man. And what it is just writing. It's about 17 stories, and every story is another Black character that you don't see in American literature.
Mhm.
You know, there's one problem or another. You know, either you know he's paranoid, either he doesn't know how to have a good relationship. He might be maybe far advanced than other people. Period. Any other person. You know, and takes us into some realm of science fiction. And I think that it's so important for to be able to write about characters. I mean, it's always been a wonderful thing for me, because anytime I go into a new genre and I write it, you know, it's like I'm the first person who ever did it who was of color. You know, but the truth is that, you know, a lot of people have done it, and that's who we are, and that's why, you know, like when I had started, I was saying, you know, a lot of black men didn't want to read books because they didn't want to be insulted by those books.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, and that brings me to my next question, and that is, you know, the American tradition, well, worldwide, but talking America right now, of reinvention. Both characters, you know, well, both universes are basically trying to reinvent themselves. Bug's trying to be this good dad who, you know, is there for his wife and his kids. And, you know, on the opposite, there is, you know, Charles and Justine. And Charles, well, spoiler alert, but his version of reinvention. So let's talk about that some, because it ties into motivation. It ties into bad decisions, trying to be someone that you're not.
I'm fascinated by identity. I'm fascinated by who we are versus, you know, our public face, our private face, and our real face. And I find myself be drawn to characters that are struggling with that. And with Beauregard, he divides himself between Beauregard and Bug. You know, Beauregard is the father, the business owner, the upright citizen who, you know, pays his taxes, and Bug is the wheelman outlaw. And, you know, the whole book is a struggle about him trying to decide, well, who is the real person? Or is he an amalgamation of both sides? And I firmly believe most people are an amalgamation of their good side, their bad side, and their real side. But I think sometimes, especially for men, especially for Black men, it's sometimes hard for us. We have been denigrated so much. It's hard to communicate that struggle to the people around us. To, like with Bug and his wife, he loves his wife and he loves his kids. It's hard for him to be even honest with her about who he is. Even though she knows him, he can't get nothing past her. He thinks he does. There's a whole scene.
She knew who he was when she got with him.
There's a whole scene in the book where he's thinking that he can fool her and stuff, and she knows what's going on. He's convinced himself in the beginning of the book that I can
get over on her. And it's like,
he's totally wrong. And so I wanted to discuss those ideas about identity within the framework of that book. And you know, and try to talk about, you know, creating an identity versus who you really are. And are your present and future determined by your past? And I don't know if I answered the question, but I had fun posing it. So
no, you did, Walter.
Yeah, well, you know, I guess, I mean, you're just talking about trouble is what I do. I think in that book, characters think that they're one thing, and either try to hold on to it too tightly or to let go of it. You know, so you have, you know, somebody who, you know, these, you know, I made up this, you know, Sisters of the Mayflower kind of organization where you have a woman who who's in this lineage, you know, of these, you know, very powerful women who and wealthy who you know, who finds out one day, well, you know, who has a relationship with a blues singer some time ago, and nobody knows about it, but she has these children that look white, but they're not. And or, you know, well, they are actually, but they're not. And so when people become aware of what their lineage is, it was way over here, you know, on the right, but now it's way over here on the left. how do they handle that, you know? And, you know, it's kind of ridiculous because you're still the same person, right?
Mhm.
Like, you know, in the end, you're the same person, you know, you are who you are, but the idea of saying, well, no, you're not white, you're black, you know? And it's like, it's so interesting how, like, when you come up to somebody and tell them that, you know, the few people I've known who were raised white and all of a sudden realized one day when they had to go back to the family that they were black, you know.
Me.
It's amazing, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, but it's funny because it is in this way, that's about creating yourself, but also being created, you know, that you've been made. And now from what those building blocks, you imagine who you are and then execute that imagination.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to turn in a totally different direction. So the heist novel, you know, as I was reading both, I'm like picturing it in my mind because, you know, we all love the Ocean 11 movies and Fast and the Furious and all, you know, these cool visuals. Was that your favorite part, both of you trying to Rube Goldberg these, you know, how to do this perfect heist and, you know, who to turn to and, you know, describe making the heist for me.
Well, for me, the heist was, it's sort of Ocean 11, but I would say it's like dirty Ocean's 11. It's back road.
Like Dirty Rice? Oh no.
Yeah, like Dirty Rice. It's like dirty country road Ocean's 11. And for me, I when I was a kid, my cousins used to work on muscle cars, Mavericks and Chevelles, and my one of my cousins had this big old Bel Air, and we would get into illegal drag races out here in the country, and I would sneak out of the window and jump in the car with my cousin, and we'd take off, and you know, and there was one night where we were racing and we passed a county cop, and he pulled up behind us, and my cousin was like, "Hold on!" He hits the nitrous, and we just take off like a rocket. G-force pressing me back in the seat. I can't even touch the dashboard, and I was like, "You're not gonna outrun these cops." And he said to me, he said, "They don't know these roads the way I do, and they don't know how to drive the way I do." And it always stuck with me. And so when I was, and he was right, we got away. So, you know, statute of limitations ran out. But when I was creating the heist and the scenes of the heist, I wanted to create a very stripped down, realistic version of that. You know, I didn't want a lot of gadgetry, and I didn't want a lot of like, you know, ex machina type stuff. I really wanted it to be Bug and this car and his skill. And, you know, even to the point of him going out and planning out the route before the actual heist. And because I knew later on I was going to set up another heist that he wasn't going to be able to plan as a droid leader. He wasn't going to be able to, like, you know, have it to his exacting standards. And so I wanted to create that dichotomy between those two situations, but I still wanted it to be very stripped down and laid bare. You know, if it's use a musical analogy, I wanted it to be acoustic instead of electric. And I just wanted it to be carried by the strength of his will and his skill and, you know, his ability to turn wrenches.
Also,
you know, I don't read very much about heists. I mean, you know, I like them.
Your Troubles, what I do had the heist in there with, you know, grease and palms and you know.
I mean, but you know, it's kind of like a, you know, like for instance, in the Easy Rolls, Mouse, you know, for some years now has been a professional heist man. You know, and every once in a while he comes around and he explains to Easy, you know, like, well, that guy, you know, he didn't know what he was doing. I saw this black guard and I said, well, I found this girl from Yugoslavia. And I brought her over, and she was happy to, you know, be with him, and he was happy to be rich. So, you know, and it kind of like that, you know, it's not kind of, you know, it's not like Sean, who, you know, really kind of works out kind of, it's lovely, you know. I don't do that. I mean, it happens, but it's not in, you know, in great detail, you know. It is, you know, it's wonderful. I always remember down the street from my parents lived, you know, a little bit east of Fairfax and Pico, and at La Cienega in Pico, back then, there was a Bank of America. and some guys had rented a building across the street, and they built a tunnel under Pico Boulevard, under the bank, up into the vault, got up into the vault, like, in the middle of the night, where there was no alarm, because, you're not supposed to get in the vault, the door, and they stole all the money in the vault. And my father was reading it and read it to me, and he was laughing. And I said, well, what's funny? He goes, well, Walter, he said, they built a real tunnel. They buttressed it. They did the whole thing, because, Pico Boulevard could have caved in on
Yes,
them.
it could have. As much traffic as that goes there, even back then.
They could have made much more money if they had just gone into business, and start building tunnels. That's a valuable skill. And I always remember that. It was like so funny. I was like, yeah, and of course, and the reason I'm mentioning it because there's no race.
Yeah,
we don't know who those guys were. We didn't know. Right. Where they learned this stuff, whether they learned it at MIT or down in Bogalusa, we don't know.
Right.
And that's always been kind of wonderful to me, because life is, it's just one thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like James Brown, the one.
And that's a question because, here we are kind of admiring those guys who had the moxie to build a freaking tunnel underneath Pico Boulevard. Is it true that there's no honor among thieves? I mean, both of you have, these kind of hero, anti-hero, bad guy, good guy type things. I mean, when you were
I don't think so.
You don't think
so? I've grown up with some characters, and I've got some characters in my family and some friends of mine when I was a kid, and I don't believe there's any honor among thieves. There's in real life, people only are as trustworthy as in direct proportion to how much they need you.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can see it every day in the paper or in the news, if some people get caught, the first person to cut a deal is the person that walks away. And so, there's no real code of silence or anything like that. I think there's a camaraderie, there's a friendship. Maybe you might have a little bit of honor, but in most instances, nah, it's whoever raised the hand first. It's like that episode of Law and Order.
I wonder about that. I think that I mean, we live in capitalism, so everybody's somehow involved in theft,
Mm-hmm.
and so like that that's a fact. It depends on who you are and who you're faithful to. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that there's anybody who's completely faithless.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a few, but just to say honor among thieves, it's just like, well, kind of we're all equal and we all do the same thing,
right.
And of course not. That's not the deal. But it might be, like somebody says, well, I'm going to arrest your grandmother, and you say, no, man, you can't take my grandmother, man. My grandmother, man, when I had that fever 104, she sat up with me for 3 days, and like, and you're not going to let them take your grandmother, or maybe it's your cousin, or maybe it's, one of your children, which, is a big thing for a lot of people. So I think that there's no absolute either way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As a rule.
We always talk about, we're always asked, what did you want to do when you wrote this novel? I want to ask the opposite. What didn't you want to do? What did you want to stay away from when you both started writing these 2 novels?
The one thing I didn't want to do was glorify violence, even though the novel is violent.
And beautifully written violence.
I didn't glorify it. It just happened.
Yeah, I didn't want to glorify violence, but I wanted it to be real. I don't think it's a prerequisite to be a crime writer that you have to have been in a bar fight, but I've been in my share, and because I got a smart mouth. And when I was younger, when I was like 17, 18, I was 10 feet tall and bulletproof. I was 5'11", 220. I was benching 400, and I didn't think nobody could lick me, and I was very wrong. I was very wrong. I got, this is a side note, but I got into a bar fight one time over a girl that me nor the other combatant were dating. We both liked her. and he told me not to talk to her at this social event. And I said, I'll talk to her. I want to talk to her, you know. I ain't never had nobody whoop me. And I remember we got in a fight outside after the club was shut down. And I hit him as hard as I could. I mean, I threw my hips into it. And he shook his head like a bull, like, phew. He was like, that's all you got? And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my entire repertoire right there. He proceeded to lay such a beating on me. Oh my God. It was like, I kept looking around like, where's the security? Somebody stop this. When they finally came and separated us, I turned to my friend that was with me. I was like, hey man, you know, I held my own, right? He said, yeah. Nah, man, he whooped you, man. God. I say that to say this. I think sometimes in fiction, violence can be cartoonish and violence can be funny. It hurts to get hit in the face. It hurts to hit somebody in the face. And so I really wanted the violence in the book to have repercussions, physical and emotional. And so I definitely didn't want it to be gratuitous, over the top, but I wanted it to be real and I wanted it to be shocking. And so that's why some of the things that happen are so visceral. But yeah, I didn't want anybody to get a punch to the face and just walk away from that, because you do not.
I knocked my knuckle into the door. That still hurts. That's how much of it went on. What about you, Walter?
And I was just thinking, you know, one of the things that George Foreman says, you know, who is the biggest, baddest dude around, but when he was the biggest, baddest dude around until he fought Ali.
Right.
And then like in the 8th round or whatever it was, Ali whispers to George, he says, is that all you got, George? And George says, he thought to him, he suddenly went, yeah, that is all. And it's like, you know, that's but to go to your question, and I think it's an important thing for writers. I just had faith that I was going to tell the story that needed to be told, and I wasn't going to do anything wrong in it. I didn't know what was right. I didn't know what was wrong. I just knew that, you know, I want to write, you know, about Easy and Mouse, who I had discovered, you know, along the way. And there were just lots of fun. I really liked them. Yeah. And I just thought, well, you know, in the end, this has to be right. You know, I'm writing about people I love. And I think that, you know, I think a lot of times, if you start writing about something and it goes too far over to the technical, the plot, you know, well, he's like this and this is like this and that's how this fits and this is where, you know, you get lost, you know. It's like that thing, like, you know, when you know, Raymond Chandler, when they called him about that, I forget which movie it was, talking this, and, well, who killed the butler? And he said, you know, I don't know. But it's okay. I mean, these are like, you know,
the big sleep.
Iconic novels.
Yeah.
But they may not work the way that people think that writing works. They do work the way what he loved.
Yeah. So on that, you know, when you're writing a story, there are like those few scenes where, you know, a lot of times when you're creating the book, you're like, oh, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks.
I do that all the time.
But then you get to some scene when you go back and read it and you're like, yeah, I put my foot in that. And you're like, that's good. What were your favorite scenes that you?
It's funny you use the term "put your foot in that" because I had to explain that to my editor what that meant. Because there's a line in the book where somebody said they put their foot in them biscuits, and she's like, "What does that mean? That's so evocative." And I'm like,
"No, it's actually the opposite."
But I think the scene, not to give too many spoilers away, but the scene. One of the scenes where Bug catches up to somebody who's betrayed him, and he puts his foot on his chest, and that person looks up at him. He says, "Oh, Bug, it's an effed up world." And he looks down and he says, "No, the world's fine. It's us that's effed up." And I thought when I finished that scene, I was like, "Yeah, that's the stuff right there."
Let me get up and go. I'm done.
I think that scene, and I think the scene where Bug is talking to Javon after he picks him up from his friend's house, and they're talking about there's been an arson in town, and he's talking to him about Bug's talking to Javon about his father, about Javon's grandfather, And and Javon says, you know, what was your daddy like? And Bug says, my daddy was a storm in a world of warm breezes.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's I got to myself. So,
check, please.
yeah. Burke shows off.
You know, I've written a lot of books, even more than was said. I think right now, pretty soon, it's going to be 60 books published.
Oh my gosh!
Wow.
And usually when I think back on them, because you know it's a long time of writing books, and I think back on them and go, you know, that's not very good. The other day, I wrote a book in the mid '90s called R.L.'s Dream. It's a novel in which Robert Johnson is the negative space. And I started reading it out loud. I don't know why, but I did. And I really liked it. Like, you know, and I like things about it that I didn't think about when I wrote them. You know, but now I was looking about it, I was going, well, you know, this is, you know, I was okay, you know, I mean, you know, my writing was all right. And it really was a shock to me. I went, wow, you know, so I could, you know, I don't have to be ashamed if somebody walks up to me and said, well, you know, I read this book that you wrote 25 years ago, and I don't know. I said, no, it's good.
Well, before we throw it open to questions, I want to know what are you working on now? What's coming next?
Currently, I'm in the midst of the revision quagmire on my next book, Razor Blade Tears. It's a revenge novel about two fathers, one black, one white, both ex-cons, whose gay sons get married and are murdered shortly after that. And so they decide to investigate the crime themselves, not only to seek revenge for their sons, but to redeem themselves, because neither one of them accepted their son's sexuality or identity when they came out. And so they were estranged at the time of their murder. And so these really tough, hyper alpha males have to really dig in deep into themselves and find the will to not only, you know, get the revenge that their sons deserve, but also become maybe better people by the end of the book.
So a cozy then.
Yeah.
Light reading.
I think it's the French director Buñuel, right, who did the Andalusian Dog. And Andalusian Dog, you know, is the one that cut the eye in half. They show you an eye. It's a cow's eye, but you can't tell. And they cut it in half, and you know, you're gonna get a lot of questions about that. So, Buñuel. I'm you know, I have this book, The Awkward Black Man, is coming out, and you know, I think I'm pretty much finished with it. I've been through the copy editing thing since it's going to come out in September, so I'm happy about that. So, but I'll still be working on it until, you know. And then I wrote a new Easy Rawlins novel called Blood Grove that you know I'm more or less finished with. You know, I still think might be a couple of changes. I've done the copy editing, you know, the copy edited version. You know, and you know, so I've been doing that, and then you know, just been other than that, you know, working. I'm out here, and you know, in Hollywood land where it really is. You can make something out of nothing. You know? It's preferable that you have nothing. You know, actually. but so you know, I'm working on hopefully doing a series with Sam Jackson about the last days of Ptolemy Gray. You know. And maybe working on this thing about Louis Armstrong. You know? So I mean, there's like, you know, there are things, you know, like, you know, if you do it long enough, you can get really, really busy. You know? Not that anything, you know, works out or anything, but you're busy, you know, and people actually pay you money, you know. Even if nothing happens.
Well, McKenna, do we have any questions?
We do, and I hate to interrupt this because I could listen to you talk for hours. It's been fantastic. We do actually have a request that's not a question from the comments, which is to show everyone's books again. So Sean's latest book, brand new, is Blacktop Wasteland. The newest Walter Mosley is Trouble Is What I Do. And then Rachel Howzell Hall's book, They All Fall Down, is
Here, September.
out in paperback. And there's the September book. Thank you. Coming up. So we have book plates for these two, and we'll be setting up an event for Rachel to talk about her books shortly. Before we get to those questions, though, I would like, as a bookseller, for you guys to tell us your elevator pitch for these books. So people, I mean, we've had an in-depth discussion of the characters, but can you just tell us what the books are? Sean, why don't you start?
Blacktop Wasteland is Hella High Water meets Drive featuring Black people.
Hell and High Water meets, what was the rest?
Drive. Featuring Black people.
I think that, you know, I get really metaphorical, and I could say the Mayflower was, you know, plowing its way toward America, and in its wake came slavery. And those two things come together in America in this mystery.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Fantastic. And Rachel, tell us about yours. They All Fall Down.
They All Fall Down. 7 sinners are taken to a mysterious island off the coast of Mexico to atone for their sins one by one. It was inspired by Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None.
And it is, that homage is clear and it's great.
Thank you.
So as far as questions, so Hillary asks, for all three of you, what influenced you most to write mysteries, and what keeps you coming back to the genre?
For me, I started out wanting to be the next Stephen King or Clive Barker, and it just never seemed to coalesce for me. And I always loved mystery and crime. I grew up, we used to go to the thrift store, and you could get 5 books for $1 out of this big basket. And all the books were all mixed up. So it was Raymond Chandler, and it was Agatha Christie, and Dorothy L. Sayers, and Mickey Spillane, and Chester Himes, and Donald Goins, and S.S. Devine, that's old Philo Vance name, a big mystery writer in the 1920s. And so I always loved those stories. I just didn't think I could do them because I grew up in a small town, and it was like, it's never a whodunit in a small town. Everybody knew who did it. It's a can you prove it? And so I didn't think I could do it. And anyway, I, by incredible happenstance, wrote a crime short story based on a dare, and it got published, and I found my niche.
Wow.
Rachel, why don't you go next?
For me, unlike Sean, I grew up in the big city, one of the biggest cities, and I still didn't think I could do it. It wasn't until I started working around working writers and working writers of color like Gary Phillips, actually. I worked with him at Penn Center USA West, that I even knew that this was a thing. And so when I started writing, I knew that I wanted to take Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale and Walter Mosley's Easy Rollins and smash them up together to create a character, and that became Lou. And with crime, as you guys know, there's so many things to discuss, so many stories to tell, and from our perspective, especially, who grew up in these towns that a lot of people write about. So that's where I get mine.
And Walter, you do all the genres, but what keeps bringing you back to mystery?
Well, it's a kind of a political / racial thing. I was writing, I just wanted to write. And I wrote a book called Gone Fishing. I love that
book. Oh my God.
It was about the late teenage Easy and Mouse in this small town, on the border between, Texas and Louisiana. There was, there's only one white person in the whole thing, and she was crazy. There were Black women, but they weren't the central focus. So it was just these 2 young Black men, who, don't have like a great education, don't have any like real, footprints in the world of, the people who people thought read. And I was told, this is really a wonderfully written book, but we can't publish it because it's not commercial. It's not commercial because white people don't read about black people. Black women don't like black men, and black men don't read. So who's going to read your book? And so then, you know, I went, okay, you know, I know a lot of people, you know, don't get published first. So I wasn't worried about it. So I started writing another book, and halfway through I realized, you know, this is kind of like a mystery. Easy and Mouse, 10 years later, not 10, maybe 9 years later in Los Angeles. And that was Devil in a Blue Dress. When I went to the publisher, they said, we'll be happy to write this, but there's one thing you have to do. And I went, what? Because you have to sell us 2 books, because we're going to start the series with this. So, I mean, that's, you know, who's going to leave, you know, that,
right.
That, you know.
Yeah.
So since you actually just mentioned writing about Black women, we have a question from Kay, who said, lots of talk about the Black male and showing him in your fiction, but what runs through your mind when you're writing your Black female characters? Are the issues different or pretty much the same?
When I write my Black female characters, I want them to be able to talk about the same issues in a different way and through their perspective. I don't want them to be window dressing, or I don't want them to be quote unquote arm candy. I tried my best to make sure they're fully formed, fully realized characters, and they view things through their specific perception, not just because they're women, but because of the things that they've gone through in their life. You know, in Blacktop Wasteland, I have a friend who told me if Bug listened to his wife in Blacktop Wasteland, the book would only be 7 pages long.
Yeah.
If he would just listen to his wife and sell the damn car, nothing that happened would have happened. And
as a Black wife, I agree.
Yeah. And so I definitely strive to make those characters believable and strong, but also not perfect, because perfect characters are boring.
Yes, they are.
Rachel, how about yours?
I was just going to toss it to them, because all my leads are Black women, and they know everything, like Sean said. And though, you know, they're not perfect characters, they're certainly interesting characters, but ultimately they're always right. No, it's a different worldview. I mean, on top of, you know, the Black experience, you have the sex and gender thing, and what it is to be a woman who, you know, kind of has to not be as pissed off at your men as, you know, you can be, because you're very aware of, you know, not tearing down the Black man. So that's an extra, you know, kind of not necessarily a burden, but a kind of censor on what you want to say, but you can't say, because, you know, there's that perception that you have to stay tough. And so you take your business, as we talked about earlier, behind the closed door, and you handle it there. And my characters tend to do that.
It's such a complex question. I mean, it's almost impossible to answer. But I'll come at it from 2 different ways. You know, when I wrote my book, Debbie Doesn't Do It Anymore, it was a female protagonist who's having our whole, you know, experience. It wasn't a mystery, it wasn't a crime novel or anything, but and I was very nervous about writing it. I'm saying, well, how am I going to write about this woman, you know? But what I realized is that I had to put her in a situation that anybody reading about would identify with, and just write it as if it was anybody reading it having this experience. And once I got through that, from the beginning to the end, very beginning of the book, it was like, okay, she's a person doing things in the world. Certainly her sexuality is going to mean something. She has a child somewhere. She has a lot of things going on. And, you know, she has made her money, you know, like, you know, in one of the many tributaries of the sex trade. But I felt I could follow that, because at least I had this first chapter which told me that. Now, the other side of that, and it doesn't even seem like the other side, is that one of the things that I come out of, I'm not really sure what's going on today, but when I was just starting writing, almost all the published Black authors were women. So you did have Terry McMillan, you did have Alice Walker, you did have Toni Morrison, you did have Gloria Naylor, you just kind of, there was this big thing, and it was a very, very powerful, very influential literature that, became international. Black men writing books or Black women writing about Black men didn't do very well at that time. And I think that the thing that I recognized was that there really wasn't enough said about the Black male experience. And I know that's a funny thing, but I think it was really important. Somebody said, well, why didn't you write about Black women detectives? I said, well, you already got 4 or 5 women doing that. Can I write about these guys? I'm not trying to insult women. I'm not trying to do anything, like bad. Or hopefully my characters are fun, like, Mama Joe and Etta Mae, they're characters who have interesting lives, but I'm talking about these guys right now. And, I feel that's a necessary kind of niche that needs to be filled.
So I have a couple of questions that don't translate to everyone, but they'll be quick, I think. Speaking of your guys, Walter, Fearless Jones is blowing up in the comments. Everyone wants to know, where is Fearless Jones?
Well, the last Easy Rawlins novel, Charcoal Joe, Fearless plays an important role. Because Easy now has a detective agency, and every once in a while they just need to be bodyguards, and so he's been hired to be a bodyguard in the new one, because Fearless is, he's not very smart, but he's really good. He's a really good barometer for the truth. And so Easy is actually using him to go talk to people, to hear what they have to say. And then when they finish talking, Easy turns to Fearless. He said, well, did you believe it? There's a wonderful fight scene with Fearless in Charcoal Joe, where I discovered things. I think this is a thing about writing novels. Yeah. Fearless saves Easy. These 3 guys are going to jump him. Easy knows he's about to be killed, but they get cut down one at a time because Fearless comes up on him. And, nobody's going to be Fearless. I mean, Sonny Liston wouldn't fight Fearless. And so, when Easy says, man, how did you do that? He said, well, my uncle, when I was, like a teenager, he used to take me out into the swamps, and we just have a bowie knife, and we'd be sitting out there, with bait, for a wild boar. And he said, when that boar came on you, man, you had to kill him quick. If you didn't kill him, he's going to stomp you to death. And when I wrote that, I went, wow, that is why Fearless is who he is. That's where he comes from, and it was so much fun. So anyway, Fearless has been playing a larger and larger role in the Easy Rawlins novels. I'm going to write another book about him in Paris because I miss Paris. But, that's in the future.
Yay. All right. Excellent. And one specific to Sean, also from Kay. She says that you said something online about your mother, maybe when you were 12, that made Kay want to know more about her supporting your writing. Does your family enjoy reading? It seems like they did. And were they supportive?
My mom is supportive from a distance because she's a very religious, conservative. I was raised Southern Baptist Pentecostal. We had a guitar in our church choir. And there's too much cursing in my books for her. So she reads them, and she's very supportive, but they're not really her types of books. Ironically, she tells me that there's too much cursing in my novels, but as Rachel alluded to, behind closed doors, my mom would make a sailor blush. So,
oh, yes.
She created curse words. She
no, Mama, please don't say that.
She called my brother a peanut butter MF one time. And so, but on Sunday morning, she's running for Jesus. So,
like you talk to Jesus with that mouth.
But she's always supported me, even if she doesn't read the books. And so, my aunt reads them voraciously because my aunt, she don't care. She loves cussing. So.
Sean, I just want to tell you like this little short story. When I studied writing, I was at City College, and one of the great living writers in English, Edna O'Brien, was teaching there. And Edna, she was my teacher. I loved her. She taught me a lot about writing. She's the reason I wrote my first novel. but she said that when her mother died, she went to a farm in rural Ireland, which is like going to someplace 500 years ago. Mm-hmm. And she had sent her mother a book. The mother never said anything. She was cleaning out the house. In the bottom of a big basket in the attic, she found her book, and her mother had gone through the whole book, page by page, and with a black pen had completely blacked out every curse word and every act of sexuality. And I said, so Edna, she was like trying to save your soul, huh? And she went, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to be a crazy mom. I'm trying.
So we have a couple questions that kind of relate, so I'm going to put them together. So Scott Montgomery, who is mystery bookseller extraordinaire at Book People in Austin, asks Mr. Mosley, what's the best advice you could give to someone starting out like Sean? And related to that, I'm going to mess up this name, Mikey, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it, I apologize, said that Sean has had somewhat a tricky road to publication, and could he discuss that? So maybe your advice, and Sean can talk about how he got there.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about writing, whenever I talk to people about writers, you know, is the big thing is you have to stick to it. And sticking to it, among other things, for most people, 99% of the people, is writing every day, right? And just continually doing that. You don't really have to even think every day, but you have to write every day. And you have to stick to it. You have to believe in what you're doing. You know, it is that. I mean, really, you know, it doesn't have anything to do with gender, it doesn't have anything to do with race. It doesn't have anything to do with how much money you had growing up or you didn't have, you know. It doesn't even have anything to do with, you know, our very lacking IQ tests. What it has to do with is somebody who wants to tell a story and commits themselves to telling that story.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I did have a circuitous route to getting published. I graduated high school, always wanted to write, wrote in high school, wrote in our horrible, everybody's high school literary magazine is horrible. And I wrote in our high school literary magazine. I went to college for 2 years, and unfortunately my mom was already ill, and she got a little more ill, so I had to come out of school, but I kept writing, and I had some adventures. You know, I followed my heart out of state, got it broke, came back. And so I just stuck with writing. And about the time I was about 23, 24, I decided I was gonna get really serious. And I bought a whole bunch of books about writing. I bought, you know, Elements of Style by E.B. Strunk, and I bought On Writing by Stephen King. And I just bought a whole bunch of books about writing. I was like, I'm gonna get serious. And I actually attended a lecture that Walter did in my home state of Virginia at William & Mary College about writing a novel in a year. So all of that stuff, I put it together. I'm gonna write this story. I'm gonna write this book. And I had written some short stories and had got them published and stuff. And so my first novel was called My Darkest Prayer. It's a Southern noir mystery, very much in the Easy Rawlins vein. I mean, it's not a parody or maybe a homage, but and so I got an agent, and the agent was excited about it. And the first thing he tells me is like, I hate the title. You got to change the title. I was like, all right, you know, you're the agent, whatever. And the title that he picked was horrible. And so that book got rejected 63 times. And every rejection, I called it the 3/4 rejection, because the first 3/4 of the email were, oh, this book is great. We love the dialogue. We love the characters. You know, we don't know what to do with it, so good luck. And so I ended up separating from my agent very amicably, and I sold that book myself to a small press called Intrigue Publishing. And they published it, and it came out. It got some notoriety, got some good reviews and stuff. And I started writing my next novel. And I ended up going to BoucherCon in 2018. I saved my money, scratched my nickels and pennies together, and went to BoucherCon. I was really going as a fan more than to promote My Darkest Prayer. And a friend of mine named Eric Pruitt got me on a panel at BoucherCon. My book wasn't even out yet, but he was like, hey, man, we got a panel on Southern fiction. You got to come on. So I got on this panel. And at the end of and it was me, Ace Atkins, Steph Post, Alex Segura, and Eric Pruitt. And at the end of the panel, we talked about Southern crime fiction, Southern fiction, you know, Eudora Welty, Flannery O'Connor, Alice Walker, Ernest J. Gaines, everything. And at the end of the conversation, this white lady stands up and she says, well, I have a comment, not a question. I was like, here we go. And so she basically said in a roundabout way that she missed the antebellum South and she felt that white people were being pushed out and going to be minorities. And so I responded to her with, I understand how that feels, but me and you, we're going to make it through this together. I'm going to teach you how to drive while black. I'm going to teach you how to not get angry when somebody follows you around in the store. Me and you, we're in it together. She got mad and left. And after the panel was over, an agent came up to me and tapped me on my shoulder. He said, hi, my name is Josh Gessler. I really like what you were talking about on the panel. Do you have anything that you're working on? I said, well, I wrote this Southern crime heist novel with black people. I don't know if you want it. He says, well, send it to me when you get home. And that became Blacktop Wasteland. Mm-hmm. And he sold it to Flatiron in last year, 2019.
The only thing wrong with what you're saying is that's not circuitous at all. Like, I mean, you just, like you said, just follow what you want to do and you just keep doing it. It's going to work. That's what you're saying, right? Yeah,
exactly. Just stick with it. You got to stick with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have time for one last question, and I'll put this to all of you. I'm expanding on something that Bryce has asked, which is essentially a question about reading. What I like to say, what are some of your reading influences, some of your favorite authors right now, and what have you read and loved lately?
I have a pat answer, but it's an answer to that. You know, I believe, and please guys, don't get mad at me for saying this, but I believe that no matter how many writers you talk to, no matter how many writers you ask that question, they will all lie about it. They will all lie. They will all tell you about the writers that they want you to compare to. Like, you know, if a young black woman says, well, you know, I like Phyllis Wheatley, and I like Zora Neale Hurston, and I like Alice Walker, and I like Toni Morrison, and I like Edwidge Danticat, and I like, you know, and, you know, like the greatest writers, you know, and they influence me, you know, and my answer, you know, like, you know, I'm saying for anyone, the most important literature is that the literature that moves you, and the literature that moves you the most is the literature you read when you were a child. Mm-hmm. And so that young black woman should be saying, you know, Nancy Drew, because, you know, she read it when she was 8. She lived and breathed it. Nancy Drew was a young black girl, lived across the street from her in this big house that she's always wanted to go in and look around about, you know. Like, if you're if you're a 8-year-old kid and you somehow get hold of, you know, Beloved, you're going to kill either yourself, you know, because she said, Mom, I read this book and there's something wrong with this shit. You know, for me, certainly, like, it's, you know, Jack Kirby, Marvel Comics. It's those things that most excited my imagination, you know, and that excitement led to the storytelling and the story, you know, and, you know, the political maturity and all that stuff, which luckily my parents didn't, you know, try to foist upon me when I was 8. And so that's my answer.
I agree with you, Walter. I mean, yes, I read all those great writers in college, in high school, and in life, because you have to read them. But who got me excited? Jackie Collins got me excited about stories and strong women. I mean, I wanted to be Lucky Santangelo. What girl didn't want to be like an Italian mob princess, right? So she got me excited. Sidney Sheldon, Tom Clancy, even Stephen King. And I'm like, here are my things. And to this day, Charlotte's Web makes me cry. When my daughter had to read it for 3rd grade, I read it with her, and it still touched me. And I still think of Paul Lynn's voice as Templeton, because, you know, as a child of the 80s, I grew up watching the animated version of Charlotte's Web. So I mean, it's not, you know, this romantic highfalutin reading list, but you know, those books got me in the library, and I just ate them up, and I love them to this day.
Yeah, like I'll just jump on that. Like my first books that I really just devoured were the Three Investigators. It was this young adult series, Jupiter Jones, and and Bob Andrews and Pete Chambers, the Three Investigators. These three kids in Southern California that investigate crimes, and at one point he threw Alfred Hitchcock in there for some reason. I don't know why. And I just couldn't get enough of those books. I read the whole series like multiple times, and then when I was about 11 or 12, and this probably explains a lot about me, my aunt got into Stephen King, and she started giving me the Stephen King novels. And the first novel I read by Stephen King was Salem's Lot, and I slept with a butter knife under my pillow for 2 weeks because I was convinced vampires were going to come scratching out my window, let me in. And so, but I never forgot how that book made me feel. It was the first book I read that I felt immersed in that world. Yeah. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so then, you go from Stephen King on to all the mystery writers I love. Like I said, I spoke about earlier, Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, people like that. And then you go into like the sci-fi writers like Clark Ashton Smith and Robert Bloch and folks like that, old writers like and like I was a big Mickey Spillane fan for a long time. Stuff like that. And then like I said, like some of the more like esoteric stuff. I read some of the classics, but the first thing that really, really made me feel like, wow, I'm transported by this book was Salem's Lot. So
this is clearly not about me, but I'm going to chime in complete agreement because I've met just about every mystery author that people would dream to meet. And the only one that I've completely embarrassed myself in front of is R.L. Stine. Because I had a box of his books under my bed. And when I met him, I just verbal diarrhea. I read all your books and I own a mystery bookstore now. And it's probably because of you.
Fair.
And I ran and I hid in the bathroom. So clearly those books are pretty impactful. And on that note of randomness, I want to thank everyone so much for joining us this evening. This has been an absolute delight. Again, take some time, check out the authors, check out their books. If you want to order, you can order at murderbooks.com for signed book plates or anywhere else that books are found. We would, of course, love if you would order from us. As far as the store is going right now, we are still currently closed to the public, but we're doing mail orders and curbside delivery. And we would be happy to recommend books, talk to you over the phone. However, we can get books in your hands. We would love to do that. I would like to thank the people at Flatiron and the people at Mulholland and Rachel, of course, for donating her time as well tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was such an honor, and thank you for having us. This was so wonderful. It's an incredible experience to be here with Rachel, and I can't say enough things about Walter. Just incredible inspiration for me. First time I read Lady Devil in a Blue Dress, I read it in 6 hours. I couldn't put it down. So just an incredible honor for me. So.
Well, listen, this is great. It was a lot of fun. I'm glad to do it. I like these Zoom things. They're kind of fun, I mean, hey.
We may be in a pandemic, but at least we can talk to people we wouldn't be talking to otherwise. So it's fantastic as far as we're concerned. And we have tons of them coming up. So if you've liked this, check out who we've got coming up. And thank you all again. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you all soon.